Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the February 2025 edition of Milwaukee Baseball, where we honor the history of our nation's pastime in the great city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm your host, Robert Cadera. Now, before we begin our main feature of this month's show, we need to take a moment to note the passing of a rather significant member of the 1957 World Championship Milwaukee Braves, FELIX Mantilla. Felix the Cat played for the Braves for 6 seasons, from 1956 through the 1961 season. His main ticket to the show was his versatility, and while Felix was never a full-time starter for those great Braves teams, he was a guy Fred Haney plugged into the lineup whenever somebody went down with an injury or needed a day off on the bench. And for the most part, Mantilla did the job. Not in 1959, however. You might recall that Red Schoendienst was out for that year with tuberculosis, and Mantilla got a shot at earning the open second base job. Instead, he hit only .215 and then made an error in the playoffs against the Dodgers that allowed the winning run to score. A year and a half later, in 1961, the National League expansion draft was held, and he was chosen by the New York Mets. He became one of the best players on that terrible team, playing 141 games, mostly at third base, and hitting a solid .275. He was traded to the Red Sox the following year. Maybe it was his reward to get out of New York. And it was in Boston that Mantilla had his greatest years. In 1964, the usually punchless Mantilla altered his swing to take advantage of the Green Monster in Fenway Park. And that year he hit 30 home runs, batted .289, and often batted cleanup for the Sox. The next year he made the American League All-Star team and hit 18 homers and drove in 92 runs. He went to the Houston Astros the following year in '65, but he tore his Achilles tendon, and he was out of baseball for good at the age of 31. Mantilla ended up settling back in Milwaukee after his career, where he worked for many years for the Milwaukee Boys Club, and he made personal appearances around town and at reunions of the 1957 champs. You might have met him. Felix's death on January 10th at the age of 90 leaves only 4 members of Milwaukee's greatest Braves team still with us. Ray Crone, who got traded to the Giants for Schoendienst on June 15th of that year, lefty Taylor Phillips, utility infielder Bobby Malkmus, and Port Washington native Johnny Demerit. For the record, boy, how time flies, there are just 33 former Milwaukee Braves still alive. The oldest is second baseman Joe Morgan, who's 94. He was tried at second base after Mantilla failed in '59. He didn't do any better. The youngest former Brave is 81-year-old Wade Blasingame, who broke in as a 19-year-old lefty in the 1963 Braves team. Old-timers might recall Blasingame being hailed as the new Spahn. Well, he did win 16 games at age 21, I believe, for the '65 Braves, but injuries cut his career short. After baseball, he worked on the Alaska pipeline before settling in Texas as an oil executive. We'll have some more profiles on former Milwaukee Braves for you in future editions of Milwaukee Baseball. Now let's look ahead. The Brewers hold their first full squad session of spring training today. And on our January show, I summarized the trades and personnel moves the team had made before the start of 2025. Let's take a look and a listen at what they did in January and where things stand as we head into the season. Listen carefully now. Yes, you heard that right. Crickets. They tell us that nothing of importance has occurred over the past 7 weeks. I find this both unsurprising and yet alarming. Right now, the Brewers' payroll stands at $99.9 million. That's fourth in the National League Central, down from third where it's been the last 4 years. By comparison, the Cubs now have a $167 million payroll, and they're still actively working to improve their roster, recently being in on the bidding for Alex Bregman, who signed with the Red Sox. Now let's turn the clock back just to 2017. Before the 2018 season, which the Brewers won by 1 game over the Cubs, the Crew's payroll stood at $136 million. That was 7 years ago, and over that time, inflation's reduced the value of the dollar by 23%. That means the current Brewers payroll represents a real 40% decrease in real dollar value from the 2017 team, and only 54% of the value of the current Cubs roster. I guess it wouldn't be so bad if the Brewers had a third baseman. The point here is that for some reason that's unexplained to the fans, the team is cutting back after going to the playoffs 6 times in the past 7 seasons, and after winning the National League Central crown 4 times over those 7 years. Brewer fans have been showing up, averaging 2.5 million fans per year. So what's going on? Without access to the team's books, we've only got conjecture, but here's my guess. Number 1, while Major League Baseball has taken some initial strides to evolve a more equitable way to share streaming revenues among all Major League teams, there's real uncertainty for the Brewers over the anticipated revenue stream they're going to be getting from the broadcast rights to their games. Number 2, the basic agreement that governs Major League Baseball is up at the end of next year, right after the 2026 season. I think the Brewers have decided to cut back on their overhead and their expenses in advance of an anticipated work stoppage after the 2026 season. Hopefully, the next basic agreement will take the needs of smaller markets into account, but only time will tell about that. The cost of pitching. This is number 3. Pitching has increased in expense far faster than the salaries of position players at a time when the team has lost its number 1 starter, Corbin Burns, to a trade prior to free agency, its number 2 starter, Brandon Woodruff, to injury, and its last 2 closers, Josh Hader and Devin Williams, who became too expensive with the rise in closer salaries. The farm system has not been able to develop suitable replacements for these players. And number 4, for a variety of reasons, the Brewers' roster is unbalanced financially. On the 40-man roster right now, 60% of the players will be making the Major League minimum salary this season. And while it may beg reason to refer to $800,000 as a minimum salary, that's the way it is in the big leagues these days. Furthermore, the Brewers have only 4 players on their entire roster who are considered veteran ball players by league definition. That means they've played beyond their 3rd arbitration-eligible year. Those 4 players, Christian Yelich, Rhys Hoskins, Brandon Woodruff, and Freddie Peralta, among them, they will make $57 million next year. That's more than half the total salary of the 40-man roster. That's an imbalance for sure. Now, as a side note, of those 4 players, only Yelich has a guaranteed contract after this season. If the team is out of contention by the end of July, I'd be looking for Peralta to go on a deadline deal, with Hoskins and Woodruff becoming free agents next October. The only bright side to this is that all those things would free up enough money to sign William Contreras to a much-deserved long-term deal if the front office has the guts to pull the trigger. One final note, and another reason why I'm picking the Crew to finish no better than third this season. The team has no depth at all. We haven't had the first full squad game yet, and already we know that both Yelich and Woodruff are likely not to be ready for opening day. Lefty D.L. Hall, he's got a lat strain, and those can last for months and months. Lefty Robert Gasser has been placed on the 60-day injured list, and he may not pitch at all this year due to Tommy John surgery. Oliver Dunn has a disc problem in his back. Abner Uribe had off-season knee surgery, and that will delay his return. Injuries could destroy this season before it even begins, and injuries, we all know, are a part of baseball. Now, next month, I'll be going to the Cactus League, and I'll be filming some games, hopefully having some interviews, and I'll give them to you in the March edition of Milwaukee Baseball. I'll be reporting on what I see, and I'll make my predictions for the upcoming season ahead. So, click on that subscribe button below, and you'll be notified as soon as that gets posted. That's it for this month on Milwaukee Baseball. I'm your host, Robert Cadera. I'd like to thank you all for stopping by, and I hope to see you again on our next trip around the bases. So long, everybody.